Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the PinPoint Players. Today is our sixth and final episode of our season 2 series about high score. And my name is Ramsay, and I'm joined with my friend and co-host Tim.
Hey there, PinPoint players.
Again, glad you guys could be there for the final one. And today, as we said, it's about episode 6 of the Netflix series High Score. I forgot the episode name.
I did too. Oh my god, I just enjoyed the episode so much.
I know, me too. I know. I hold on. I'm typing in real time just to go look for it. But we should keep this party. But I enjoyed this episode so much, even compared to episode 4. Level Up. The episode's
Level
called
up.
Level Up.
The sixth episode of the High Score, the Netflix documentary series High Score, entitled Level Up.
Right. For me, another special one from a nostalgia point of view because I knew the episode was immediately about Doom from the intro, but also the outro in episode 5. And I played Doom a absolute crap ton when I was a kid,
Yeah.
and it was during an era where there was a lot of controversy around video game violence. And for me, looking back on it in retrospect, I'm surprised my parents just let me play it. I think I owe a lot to Omar because he was definitely way old enough to play it and be
Yeah.
okay with it. And me, I was just the kid that got lucky to be a part of the fun.
Well, yeah, with your brother being already established as sort of the older sibling and all of that, the things that he had, he would just, I assume, just, pass along down to you. So, do you think was Omar old enough to play
Well,
Doom?
I mean, yeah, I mean
Okay,
from an ESRB standpoint, my brother would have been when the game came out because we had it on PS1, which wasn't out until I think '95. He would have been 13. So in terms of
sure,
ESRB, absolutely not. But in
sure.
terms of parents being like, go play something and leave us alone, absolutely.
Well, yeah, I mean, with the controversy sort of just riling up, I mean, it makes sense to me.
Oh
But
yeah. So and the other thing before we get into it is the PS1 version was the only version I ever got to play as a kid. I didn't have access to the more superior PC version because we didn't have a PC that was capable of playing Doom. And even if we did, I don't think my dad, who owned and like used the PC for work, was not going to let us play games on it because he didn't understand it and thought like, oh, I don't want you installing this crap on my computer. So at least at the time when Doom came out, that wasn't going to happen. But it didn't matter because the PS1 to me was the definitive version. It wasn't until I was an adult where I realized that it was inferior to the PC version. But as a kid, that stuff doesn't matter.
mm, I also didn't, I also didn't realize that there was a difference. But having gone through the documentary, yeah, there's a major significant difference between the PC and the console. But there was also a giant difference in the PC versions. But we'll get into that a little bit later. Let's start with the how the episode starts here.
I mean, it's simple enough. 11:59, December 9th, 1993. The game is about to be released, and the world is about to go nuts over it.
Yeah, they had recently put out a press release boasting that the game would be the number one reason for procrastination in the world, and they hadn't even developed the game. So when it came time to launch the game, their marketing strategy was pretty neat. Everyone, what they said in the documentary, hundreds of people jumped onto the server to download the first portion of the game and crashed the server, which I thought was extremely funny because looking back on it from today's point of view, I mean, we have live streamers on YouTube who host hundreds of thousands of viewers every hour, 7 days a week.
Oh yes, and back then it was during the heyday, or the maybe the early days of AOL, dial-up. Internet was slow, take forever to connect, let alone download anything. So I can only imagine how long it would have taken to download the copy of Doom that you're trying to get, as everybody on the planet is trying to do at the same time. I mean,
Right.
again, we should stress that this was the still early days of the internet, so it was impressive that they even were able to make it available to people online. But anyway, Doom came at an inflection point when PCs were rising in popularity, and the two big names behind Doom, John Romero and John Carmack, were the lead developers that would make this happen. And the way they got Doom to happen was pretty awesome. It took a lot of work to make it happen, and it took kind of inventing new tech to make it so. I mean,
Mm, mm,
so one thing we take for granted is in side scroller games, at least on console, you can easily have the camera fixed on the character in the center of the screen so that way the screen moves with you. But on PC, that tech was actually very difficult, and for whatever reason, I just didn't. That never clicked in my head. That
yeah.
I always figured since PC had access to the usually the better hardware, that consoles would usually be catching up with PC even back then. But I guess there was once a point where the opposite was true, that sometimes the console had the advantage over the PC. That's not the case anymore. But late '80s and '90s were a different time in our history.
It certainly was. Speaking back about that old time, I remember being very frustrated. I don't remember specifically the games that I played on PC, but I remember side scrollers, and there being like a cherry or an apple in the top right corner, and to get it, you had to jump over to the next panel. But to get the power up, you needed to go back and forth between the two panels. It was like I needed to go into this panel to get to climb the ladder, to cross the bridge, and then back into this panel. But I had to jump, and as I was jumping, it was transitioning into the next panel, and I missed the power up, and it was like, well, this is frustrating. I wish there was just more smooth motion.
It was jarring.
Very difficult to play.
So John Romero, John Carmack, and team were basically assigned. I mean, they themselves assigned it because they did this as more of a passion project in the beginning to make these games before they developed a company and all that. They, were on the case to try and make this work. Something that the documentary mentions that I have to call out because this was an important part of my childhood is he talks about a subscription service called Gamer's Edge. Every month you would get a random floppy disk, for the computer you were subscribing for with a bunch of random game demos. And it makes me nostalgic because when I was a kid, I don't remember how the subscription for us started. My brother might have been the one doing it from a magazine himself because I sure as hell do not remember. It makes me nostalgic for the old demo disc on PS1 of my childhood. I really miss the concept and excitement of a new demo collection. You get a new disc in the mail, maybe once a month, maybe every other month. And I remember one demo disc specifically. It had this hover bike game called Jet Moto 2. It had Tomb Raider. It had this one puzzle game. I'm blanking on the name. It was called, I remember now. It was called Intelligent Cube. And I think Medieval was one of the ones on that demo disc. It was one of my favorite demo discs. And this was back during the time as a kid where I didn't have any sort of money. So I would play the same first level over and over again because I couldn't afford anything at the time. So that's all I would play. And I longed to get those games. And eventually we did get some of them, but not all of them. Intelligent Cube was one that I always wanted to play more of as a kid. But in the US and today, and for folks interested, go look up YouTube gameplay because it's one of the most interesting puzzle games I've ever played. If you want to get it for English, on eBay for a used copy, I think it's like $60 or $70.
That's not too bad.
Right, but consider this. Jet Moto 2, the first Tomb Raider, the second Tomb Raider, if you want to go get an old PS1 copy, I think they can be had for sub $5, $10 on eBay.
Whoa.
Because they were everywhere. Whereas Intelligent Cube, I think, had a very short printing run. The other thing was, I think it was more popular in Japan because when I look for it on eBay, I think I'm seeing more Japanese copies than I am American copies.
Well, there's a couple of different reasons that might be. I'm not sure about Intelligent Cube. Never played it, but it sounds interesting. It sounds like one of those games that you play as a kid, and you think that you'll get better at playing it when you're older. You're like, well, maybe I'm not like old enough to play this game. Old enough as in like I know that I'd be smarter and get it.
Oddly enough, I did. So I managed to get a copy of the game when I was a kid, or not, sorry, as an adult. So on the PS1 store, I did a little bit of homework back 8, 9 years ago. I found that they had the game on the PS1 store and PS3, but it was only in Japan. There was no American digital download. So I figured out a way to make an account, a Japanese account, basically go download the game, and when you download the game on that account, it exists for all your other accounts on PlayStation.
Oh.
So doing that trick was allowing me to play the game, and at first I was craptastic because I hadn't played it in 20 plus years.
Yeah.
But stuck with it, learned the gist of it, and I ended up getting good of it to the point where I beat the main basic game. Now, if you want to go to stage, the second, like New Game Plus, where it's much harder, then that gets way too hard exponentially. So where it was a blast. I'm glad that I was able to find a way to play because it was one of those games where it was fun as a kid, but would I find it fun as an adult? And the answer was a resounding yes.
That's great. Yeah. It's funny. I was thinking about the different versions, and there are a couple of different versions. I mean, there are always different versions, but there might be more Japanese versions if it's a type of game that you can speed run. Do you know if it's like that kind of?
So I think it's definitely possible because there's as you're in the game, you try and you're a character running along a block platform, and you're looking to disintegrate certain blocks. And the objective is the blocks keep rolling toward you to disintegrate certain blocks. I know I'm not doing a good job describing it, so I recommend people go look up a YouTube video. But you would disintegrate certain blocks, you would leave certain others, and then you would go on to the next set, onto the next set for every level. But there was a button specifically that lets you fast forward, so that way you can have the blocks come towards you, hit the button, fast forward, and then keep going. So it's
Hmm.
definitely possible for a speed run, but I would say it's probably not that big of a speed run title, only because the game, at least stateside, was probably not very well known
Hmm.
because of its limited release. And it's a good puzzle game. It's very unique. It's one of the most unique I've ever seen. And again, I stress people go check out a 5 minute gameplay on YouTube just to see what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Props to John Carmack and John Romero.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
oh yeah. Separate long side tangent about demo disc aside, because again, a big part of my childhood.
but yeah, they did the subscription-based service. I believe it was called Gamer's Edge.
Yes,
Yeah. I had some Gamer's Edge floppy disks. I remember specifically.
you still have them.
They're probably somewhere up at my parents' place. It
Oh, you
was
should dig that out. That'd be awesome.
I was immediate as soon as I saw that, I was like, I know that familiar title. I've seen that. I forget what we had, but it was probably the games that I was talking about. Whenever I would be frustrated going between panels in the side scrollers, it was probably from a Gamer's Edge. Yeah, I remember being involved with that. I am complete like, oh, I gotta go find those. I bet they'd be worth something. But in the documentary, they mentioned how Gamer's Edge produced between 10 and 12 games a month for this subscription service, which was roughly 100 to 120 games a year. Comparatively, today's big game studios do what?
One big release.
One, two, one,
But
two a games.
depends on the size of the studio. I mean, if you're a big EA type
Let's
studio,
say like,
you probably got a couple dozen games. But
sure.
if you're a smaller indie-ish developer, you might have two or probably just one a year. But back then, I guess
I mean, yeah, 10 or 12 games a month.
I know. So it tells you that there were just a lot of people trying to make a thing of it. So they would. I'm guessing this is what I take the process to be. You would be a small time team of developers. You would submit your game to Gamer's Edge, get on the demo, and hope that people go, "Hey, this game's great. Where can I get the full version?" And just go from there.
Mm,
So it was putting yourself out there, and it makes me miss the days of demos. Now there are games where they still do demos, but they're very uncommon now.
mhm.
They don't exist anymore. And there's a video that has 7 reasons about why demos aren't a common thing anymore. And I'm thinking, I don't remember the name of the YouTube channel, but if you type in YouTube 7 reasons why demos aren't made anymore, it explains it very well. One being that I think a lot of people these days feel that if they play a demo, they've played the whole game and they're like, oh, okay, well, this was fun, but I'm good. I don't need to play anymore. So they're fearful that if they put too much of the product out there, people might not want to continue with it. Whereas back then, the culture was much different in the gaming world.
Oh, I agree. A big demo that actually was just released was Resident Evil Maureen, but they did a demo for it.
Oh yeah, we talked about this recently.
Hmm.
I can't remember the Resident Evil
I,
game, but
I,
it's coming out
I,
later this year.
it's coming out later this year. They did a demo for it. Modders have already dissected and completely turned the demo into just a playground for themselves, which good for them.
Yeah,
I kind of agree, but I also think that demos kind of do like they did enough. It was kind of to show enough that hey, we do have a product. This is kind of what it's going to be like. But when you have a like when you put something out into the ether, people sort of expect it to be that way going forward. Like this is what I first was experienced with, and this is how anticipate the experience to continue. But with some demo releases, things change, they get better, they get worse. It's a tricky thing. I think it kind of raised people's expectations, which is why they might have stopped.
or definitely taper down because you make a good point with Resident Evil and its demo. I think, and folks can definitely correct me if I'm wrong, but I think from the demos that I remember in recent memory, I'm talking the last 10 years,
Mm,
they've tended to be more from Japanese titles. I think a lot of American titles just if there's a demo, the de facto demo these days is either the first episode of like a Telltale game when those were actually out
mm,
would be free, but you have to pay for the others. So that's kind of a glorified demo, kind of similar to what Doom did, which we'll get to in a second.
yep,
And then the other one is Metal Gear Solid Rising. There was a release called Zone of the Enders, and to get the demo of Metal Gear Solid Rising, or Metal Gear Rising, I believe what it's called, you have to get Zone of Enders, and same thing, you play the first level, and then it would kind of get you excited for the Metal Gear Rising game that would be coming out next year. And so you play it, and it kind of be a twofold. Zone of Enders would get a sale, and then it would get people excited to get Metal Gear Rising, and so you could potentially get 2 game sales out of it just by putting 2 things in one. But the point is, they may not be called quote unquote demos in the same way that remember when we were kids, but it's demo-ish. But the days of demo discs, that kind of concept,
Oh
are so
wow.
gone, long
Yeah,
gone.
yeah. No, I vaguely remember demo discs, but
But anyway, back to because
how this came to be is actually pretty interesting.
one other thing I want to say, and
Oh
just to
sure.
interrupt you for a sec. Well, not last thing I want to say. It's not on demo disc, but just Doom itself. We're going to explain a little bit about the Doom process from what we saw in the documentary. But I recommend this because I saw this and I want to recommend this to you folks. There's a YouTube channel called Ahoy, just like Ahoy Matey,
Ahoy, hoy.
Ahoy. And on this YouTube channel, he actually explains the entire development process of Doom from the beginning where id Software was forming, when they just after they made Wolfenstein, to how they made Doom and kind of the legacy it left afterwards. Name the video, I think it's
Ahoy,
just called
hoy.
Doom. It's just called Doom. So it's a think about 45-ish minutes.
Oh,
So it's a longer YouTube video, but it's a good one. It explains the whole process. So if you folks are interested at all in learning how Doom was made through and through and want to see good visuals and learn a lot more stuff than even we are going to tell you today, go check that out.
yeah, go check out Ahoy. Ahoy. Anyway, yeah. So what I actually really appreciated about this next little bit is it was a visual explanation of things that can't be said. So the episode alludes to a trip through the Mushroom Kingdom where Cormorant and a few buddies they removed the cartridge from Super Nintendo, and they most likely, I'm not gonna say definitively because I have no clue, but they most likely copied and pasted the code for the scrolling from the cartridge onto their PC during a mushroom trip. I assume just because the way that the
Oh
video.
no, I agree. I mean, can't say for sure, but it's what it alludes to. So we'll just take a leap of faith there.
Sure, I mean, we can all believe what we all want to. But anyway, yeah, visually I thought that was pretty interesting, saying things that you can't say without saying them.
Got to be crafty.
So yeah, that eventually became their improved version of Danger Dave, which was actually quite eloquently titled Danger Dave Copyright Infringement. Who knows why they did that, but
Oh
it was
yes.
yeah, it had the Super Nintendo background. It had their character Danger Dave, which they had created a few months prior, and it had that smooth scrolling that they were working towards to improve their games. I guess it would be considered the best way because it's how it came to be. But when you come across a problem and somebody else has a solution, by learning from their solution, you can create your own.
Well, exactly. I mean, sure, it's in a sense copying, but if you have a technological limitation and somebody else has been able to figure out, rather than take a couple of years to find the solution yourself, reinvent the wheel, you could just shortcut yourself because if that's because you're not copying their game, you're using a trick that they did to kind of help you out. Could everyone build their own kit cars to go on the road? Sure, but it's honestly much easier to go down to a dealership, strike a deal with a dealer, and get yourself a new car or used car, whatever.
Yeah,
Same is true here. I know the analogy's not perfect, but you guys get the idea.
yeah. Along those lines, I think, yeah, we can all learn from what has happened in the past.
Other crazy thing about this is in developing the game, Danger Dave, this was all done in their spare time, but the other thing I got from this was it looked like a fun time in the same way that the people from Mortal Kombat, when they were
Hmm.
making the fighting moves, were having a blast of a time, all coding together in a shared space, eating junk food, listening to heavy metal music. I mean, it's a recipe for making a damn good game. And with all that, they managed to start that company id and make that concept a reality. And they first did that with making Wolfenstein to get that 3D accelerated, graphical environments.
Hmm.
And then once they did that, they said to themselves they had to go bigger. And so it didn't say in this documentary, but I remember learning from that one YouTube video that I was referencing. They said that lightning speed and multiplayer were essential in the next big project, but specifically, and they said they quote Wolfenstein times a million. So the hype was real. The expectations were higher than sky high.
That's a pretty interesting way to approach it. Honestly, it's about pushing the envelope. I mean, when you get to a point. Well, before I get into that, I would like to also mention from Wolfenstein's perspective, I actually remember playing Wolfenstein with my cousins and my uncle Steve. He had a computer, and he was really excited about the computer, and he was like, "We got to play this game. This is the most amazing game I've ever played."
Oh, nice.
So he shows us the game, and I also was blown away with it. I was just like, "There's a wall there on the screen, and as you're moving, you can move towards that wall or away from that wall."
They essentially created the first person shooter.
Yeah.
Like they were the father of it.
Hmm.
Maybe somebody else, somebody like I'm sure they're not the very first example in the video game world, but in terms of the development and the mainstream approach to it, you could say that the father of first person shooters, id Software, the company.
Yeah, I didn't realize that. I didn't realize at the time what I was also watching. I just thought it was another game, but that's partly because I was raised in that generation. But
Right.
I really appreciate that the documentary helped me realize that, yeah, I was living through history, essentially, looking at it from a gamer's perspective, somebody who's invested in games and finds the history behind it really interesting. I was a part of that, not in the sense that they created it, but living through the results.
Right, yeah, same thing. We witnessed a lot of things or were part of a lot of things growing up, especially in the 90s that you never really know until you look at it in retrospect. Doom, Wolfenstein, id Software were no exception.
Now, what I appreciated about Wolfenstein and what they eventually did with Doom was, although they may have pilfered the coding for the smooth scrolling for side scrollers, what they actually wanted to do was push that envelope and make it as their own as they could. So when they came up with that solution to make side scrollers more smooth, they said, you know what, let's not make another side scroller. Let's make this the 3D game because Cormac was a graphic designer and actually wanted to work on higher quality graphics, but they took the side scroller smoothness and made that what was so appealing for Wolfenstein and Doom, which was their own thing.
They had a foundation they
Right.
wanted to work from, that's the word. And then they wanted to build from that and make this awesome product. And they did. Like I said, the hype was real. They went all out with the enemy and level designs. And they said the story would be secondary and the focus was all on the level design and gameplay. And to that point, John Carmack was quoted once saying regarding games and stories, and I agree to this with some extent, but I also disagree with another sense because games can still tell good stories with also good gameplay. He said at one point, this wasn't a documentary, stories in a video game are like stories in a pornography. They're expected to be there, but they're not that important.
Well, that's certainly true of pornography. I've ranted about how great the story to 13 is, even though it's not a video game story. It's a comic book story that a game adapted. I experienced for the first time that story through a video game.
Right, and that's the thing. That's where I have to disagree with this quote, but in the sense of Doom, I'll agree with it wholeheartedly because
Oh yeah,
the story in Doom is completely secondary, and I agree because you play it, there is a story, it's paper thin, but who cares because you're, shooting demons in the face, you're on Mars, you're in hell, and other times of the game, it's all over the place, and I love it for that. Doom was actually the first use of the term deathmatch for multiplayer because you would go
yeah.
online, you would select deathmatch, and I didn't realize it was the first game to do that, and the first time you could play high speed online multiplayer, not this slow, oh, I'm going to do a chess move, it's really slow, and wait for them forever to reply, or play backgammon or some other thing. This was cutting edge, and they proved it. And they managed to deliver a complete product, complete with modding. As long as you bought the game, you could mod it to your heart's content and do whatever you want.
Yes.
And the other thing was, just like we talked with the demo disc, what was awesome for how they made the game distributable was the first episode of Doom was free via shareware, what they talked about, where you have to go online to download it. But to get the rest, you had to buy the rest. It worked perfectly because once people were done with a taste of the first episode, they wanted more naturally. And it's the only game in history, and I remember this from another, documentary about Doom. It's the only game in history to boast more installations than Windows.
Ah, so there are more. Yeah, there are computers that could technically just have their operating system be Doom.
Not their OSB Doom, but just there are more computers installed with Doom than Windows
Okay.
because I think Windows was just emerging, but Doom could basically run on so many different platforms. I mean, even these days, people have been able to make Doom run on a printer screen. Seriously,
That's
that's
amazing.
that's how amazing the source code was, and how moddable and adjustable it was, and how genius other people can be. Why am I saying all this? It was a fun damn product
Yeah.
that I enjoyed so much as a kid, and even as an adult, every couple of years I go back and play Doom again because it's a fun game. Almost 30 years old at this point, but it's still a blast to play. Anybody that hasn't played it, who's listening to this, go play it, and you can go play it on pretty much any platform. It's on Steam, it's on console. If you have your old consoles laying around with Doom, go play it. However you can. There's always a way to play it now.
Oh yeah, it seems like Doom was such an innovative game in the fact that it was so. I mean, it was marketed very well. It was the pioneer for multiplayer games. It was a product of the company that pioneered first person shooters. Having watched this documentary in its entirety with the last couple of minutes of the last episode, I really grew my appreciation for Doom. Like, I might go on to say that Doom is my favorite video game in general, just because of how free thinking they were. You bought the game, you could do anything to the source code. They wanted you to. John Romero went on to say in the documentary, we wanted our players to feel like they were creating the game or something along that line.
Modding it
Modifying it, yeah.
to their heart's content. And that was the thing. In order for it to have a long lasting legacy, not only did you have to deliver an amazing product, which they did, by allowing people to mod it, you're essentially giving it a legacy in real time.
Yeah. Which, again, I think is one of the reasons I might go on as much as I love 13. 13 is a great story. It was a great game at the time, but from everything that Doom has spawned,
It's legacy.
exactly. It's got such a strong legacy. I think that it would make sense to say it's my favorite game.
For me, it's definitely in the top five, and as a result of its legacy, Doom 1 was amazing. Doom 2 improved upon that. Doom 3 was different. It wasn't bad, but it was different in that it went for more of jump scares. You're going around a ship. It lost the slow pace action. But then when they redid Doom, the release from 2015 or 16, I played that. That was a fantastic kind of return to form of the Doom I remember when I was a kid. You're running around a little fast, shooting demons, hellspawn, and they continue that in Doom Eternal. Not played that yet, but point is, legacy has stood the test of time, and I hope it stands the test of time for another 25 years.
Oh yeah, me too.
Actually, more. Actually, no, more than that now.
What we can do to help is to keep buying it from the company or the person that helped create the game. At the end of the episode, I really enjoyed that they kind of had. I think it was John and Giles. Was it John and Giles? Those two.
Oh no, Dylan and Giles. So yeah, which we'll get to them in a second. But what were you saying about Doom?
Uh, what I really appreciated about the end of the episode was that it had John Romero, the creator of Doom, on an online forum playing the game Doom. Like while they were filming that, all I could think of was there's some guy in a group, or there's a group of people in that session playing with the actual creator of the game. And they could just playing a normal game, it's another day in their life. And they just happened to be in a session with the creator of that game. Like, it was mind blowing for me to see.
Oh, it was amazing just to be a part of that experience. And for folks that want to hear, but John Carmack, unfortunately, I guess he wasn't maybe scheduling or maybe didn't want to be in this document, but he did do an episode with Joe Rogan maybe about a couple of years back where he talked with him. And I think in the episode he talked about the development process, being at id Software behind Doom. And so for folks interested in hearing about John Carmack and his point of view, recommend you get that episode a watch or a listen. I don't remember the episode number, but I do know if you just type that in on YouTube, you'll find it.
Yeah, and it's actually the easiest way to find Joe Rogan's spot. Joe Rogan, guest name.
Yeah, he's only the most well-known podcaster on the planet, but anyway, whatever.
For the time being.
True enough.
But yeah.
So yeah.
So how Doom was created was kind of pilfering some data from a Nintendo product, and here we go. Later on in the episode, we have the same type of thing happening between.
Yeah, no, it's Giles Goddard and Dylan Cuthbert, both very Englishy bloke type dudes. Specifically, I think they were working for Argonaut Software.
Yes.
And they were trying to make a 3D game for the Game Boy, which honestly, when they said they would do that, I'm like, okay, I more or less know the hardware of the Game Boy. I don't know how the hell you do that because it was very limited in what it can do. But they did it anyway. Somehow managed to do it. And Nintendo found out about it, and I thought, well, normally this is where they get slapped with a fat lawsuit for, modifying their software without the permission. But luckily, they were curious on how they did it. And thank goodness they were, because they got invited to Japan expecting to kind of get lambasted by Nintendo, but they actually wanted to see if they could hire them and see what they could do as far as skills go. And on a side note, I love the animation in the conference room scene
Yeah.
where it had the Nintendo enemies over the faces of the people in the conference room to make it look like they're in trouble, that
Yeah.
they're kind of
Those
screwed.
blockheads.
Yeah, the blockheads. And the documentary always managed to nail the retro scene visuals, if that's one thing I can say about this entire series. Luckily, they got a contract rather than being sued. One of the things that was done was they would be part of the development process for a game on Super Nintendo. But that was done by apparently Nintendo through a lot of their input. Put a 3D chip called the
Super effects.
Super Effects microchip, and by doing so, they were able to create these 3D effects for every game. So instead of having the console do all the work, you could kind of offload some of that responsibility on the cartridge itself.
Which I also thought was innovative and really creative in a sense. They modded and hacked a Game Boy to play 3D graphics, and that the way their solution was to mod and hack the pre-released Super NES through the game cartridges. So you'd always have this form, or this chip in this case, not a form, but you'd have this chip in cartridges going forward, hacking the system.
Which made a lot of the games that subsequently came out a lot easier to have more incredible 3D animations. It was a huge jump forward from the 8-bit original Nintendo.
And I'm kind of glad that something like that was incorporated. A, because of the inspiration that came from Shigeru Miyamoto when he realized that they were kind of just turning this into a point and shoot. He didn't like the spatial awareness that it created at the time. He took the time to really think about it. Shigeru Miyamoto, I mean, dude, like,
He's a visionary.
yeah, PinPoint players. Everyone must know at least one game that he's done. If you have a favorite of his, let us know in in our social media in the comments any way that you can.
Yeah, his work is just truly influential. Like they said in the documentary that he had a very weird kind of mind in terms of how he approached things, but in that weird mind, he was always kind of cooking new ideas for maybe levels, maybe new characters, or new games altogether. And that's kind of how he arrived at creating Star Fox and taking the game forward. He took a trip to the Vermilion Gates during a Christmas break, and at that place, if you Google it, there are these red gate slash archways that you would see kind of walking through, and he figured that, wait a minute, I could take the player down, say, a tunnel corridor, as if you're flying through a ship down a tunnel corridor, shooting whatever is on the way, and it gives player a more streamlined experience instead of just flying around aimlessly, pointing and shooting. It gives a game the direction, literally and figuratively. And when you talk to Giles and Dylan about that, Star Fox was born, and the Fox character was a reference to
The shrine. The shrine is, I believe it's called, and if my pronunciation is off, let me know, PinPoint players. Fushimi Inara. Fushimi Inara. Inara meaning fox.
Yeah, and because the game took place in a space environment, Star Fox. Luckily, it caught on, and they designed the cute cast of characters.
The cute cast, which is necessary for a Nintendo product.
Yes, and I still even remembered it, even though they didn't mention my name. You had Fox, Peppy Hair, Slippy Toad, and Falco.
Oh, it was something else. His first name was something else. Papa. For some reason, the synonyms or the syllables, Papa Falco. It was like Pepar or Pepe. No, that's Peppy.
That's Peppy Pig,
That's
Slippy
Peppy.
Toad, Falco.
We'll just call him Falco.
Yeah, it'll be Falco, but I'm sure we'll figure that out later.
I'm sure you guys will let us know.
Yep, in whatever way you can. It all came together to create, I think at the time, Nintendo's first 3D game, and released to worldwide critical acclaim. And its legacy is, still there in that you have the characters, you have the games. But I will say, I am clamoring for a new Star Fox game on the Switch or some sort of Nintendo platform, because they made the ones on N64 were awesome. Then they made Star Fox Adventures, which was different. And then they made one called Assault on the GameCube, which, from what I remember, was decent, but didn't have that awesomeness that the original one did.
Yeah.
And then I think there was another one on the Wii, but I think I read that it was considered okay. So I think Miyamoto and the team kind of need to get back together, get back to the roots, and just deliver another good product.
I agree. They can. Yeah,
and I'm hopeful.
They have so many properties that they could be developing newer concept games. I haven't seen a really good standalone Kirby game. I haven't seen a Donkey Kong Country.
I mean, the last Donkey Kong standalone game was I made one on the Wii U called Tropical Freeze, which I played that. I played that with my wife because it was a co-op game, and it's fun. It's actually somewhat tough in some areas, but it's fun enough. But the other thing is, we're fighting a big losing battle with nostalgia because we played all these games as kids, and no matter how hard they might try, no matter how hard we might try to kind of infuse our nostalgia into these new games,
Mm.
it'll never be the same. It can be fun, but it'll never be the same. And I don't mean it as like you can never have fun games again. It'll just means that nostalgia is a very tough thing to overcome. Damn near impossible.
I think that'd be a pretty interesting topic to discuss. Is sort of how games are, what sort of things that we appreciated about our games are kind of being phased out of the newer games.
Yeah, no, I agree. That'd be an interesting topic, and also just do the things that we remember being fun as a kid. Do some of them hold up? And I would say, just off the cuff, most of them probably do, but I would wager that a lot of them probably don't, and we just are doing the whole rose tinted glasses. But that's a whole nother episode in its own right, and definitely something to talk about in the future. But circling back, this last episode showed that gaming was changing. It wasn't just about the 2D world anymore. It was a 3D. It was a big 3D world with new games, new cutting edge tech. These two games were the beginnings of something wonderful as
Yeah,
far as the future is.
they evolved.
Yeah, they evolved the medium and they continues to evolve it today. But both their legacies can't be understood or can't be misunderstood. Doom for everything we talked about, Star Fox for everything we just discussed. Before we wrap up, I do have to mention I did really like the ending, how it all circled back to Nolan Bushnell and
Yeah.
how his inspiration first struck him back in the 60s when he was in college. It all comes back to the beginning. It all comes back to when we were young.
Yeah, I mean, we have to jump back in time, Pinpoint players, for this last bit for the documentary. But we've been talking about the development of Star Fox, which was in the mid to late '90s, mid early '90s, and Doom, which was along the same time period. This Nolan Bushell, who is the founder and CEO of Atari Games, we have to jump back to 1964 when he was at MIT. A friend came up to
I,
him.
I don't think it was MIT because I think the system was designed from MIT.
He wasn't at MIT.
I don't think so. Let's. Oh, here it is. Bushnell. All right. So quick Wikipedia research aside, Nolan Bushnell enrolled at Utah State University in '61 to study engineering, then later business. '64 he transferred to the University of Utah College of Engineering. Okay, so he's at the University of Utah
Okay,
College of Engineering, but the concept came from MIT. But anyway,
came from
continue.
MIT. But yeah, his friends kind of said, "Hey, you want to see something that'll blow your mind? Come to this place at after midnight." He's like, "Okay, yeah, sure." And they showed him Space War, which was
A super early, I won't say arcade because wasn't really an arcade, but it was a super early
uh,
space game concept. Kind
yeah,
of the same way you had all these other games in the '70s, but this was 1964, and this was developed by people at MIT on their really humongous computers in 1962. So we're talking really early in the past. It was one of the first video games ever developed, and he saw that, he loved it, and figured that this wasn't something that you know it could just be for the computer nerd. This could be something that people could put it in a quarter, play it, and have fun. And very American mindset there. Just
yep.
how can we monetize this? How can we make it so that way the everyman can play it for a price? But
As soon as he saw it, he said, "I can make money off of it."
yeah, again, very American culturally thing. But coming back to this, it was the inspiration for the arcade and for the company Atari, and all from a game developed for funsies by people from MIT just to see if they could do it. And
Mm.
again, one of the first video games ever. Not the first, and that's another one I wouldn't mind exploring in the future. The very first video game ever, because we have to go back to the '50s for that one. But it's probably one of the first video games where they're able to see it and go, we can make this into some sort of arcade product in the future if we keep at it. And folks at Netflix, if some of them are ever listening to this, that would be an interesting one-off episode documentary just to see how Nolan Bushnell got from that moment in 1964 to finding a way to create Atari, start that up, and kind of monetize the idea of playing video games, putting in a quarter. That I'd be curious about a one-off, maybe 50-minute episode.
Mm.
Kind of interesting to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And considering that if the executives from Netflix are listening and you've gotten this far, you certainly know that we would love to helm and take control of a project that, like that. So you should probably get in touch with us. And you can do that with the links down below. You can reach us on email, pinpointplayers@gmail.com. You can find us on Instagram @pinpointplayers. And you can find us on YouTube with the Pinpoint Players channel.
To that end, I'm so glad that you guys were able to join us for all 6 of these episodes. It was a blast watching this whole documentary. Learned a hell of a lot of information. It was a blast to watch for not just educationally, but nostalgic purposes. And I'm glad that everybody was able to join us for the ride. So with that, this will conclude our season 2.
Yeah, thanks guys for tuning in. We've got great content coming up for you in season 3. Make sure that you leave a 5-star review on our Apple podcast. Make sure that you follow us on Spotify so that you can catch all of our next season's episodes. And we hope that you enjoy tuning in with us, and you enjoy. Take care.
Until next time, guys, have a good one.
Later.